The Mace family legacy is written on stone markers that line the hills outside Fort Orion. Every childhood memory of mine is traced by military banners, medals and glass cases, and the weight of expectation. When I drove through the gates that morning, the guard at the checkpoint barely glanced at me, just a courtesy nod to another face from the long shadow of the Mace name. I parked far from the crowd, not out of humility, but habit. There are corners where old disappointments are easier to bear. The field was crowded for Mireille's promotion, every seat taken by men and women in uniform, their shoes polished to a mirror shine. My father Corbett stood near the front row chest, puffed a living portrait of all-American resolve. My mother Celine wore her favorite pearls and the tight, gracious smile she'd practiced for decades. As I walked toward the reserved section, heads turned. A couple of neighbors offered forced smiles. My aunt whispered too loudly, "She's the one who left the academy." I took my place at the edge of the row, apart from my family's center of gravity. The program began marching band speeches, the obligatory invocation. Mireille's name echoed across the grounds, met with thunderous applause. I clapped too, even as my hands trembled slightly. The pride I felt was genuine, but the distance between us was all the more painful for it. It was during the presentation of colors that it happened. The honor guard advanced with the flags, and among them I spotted a familiar face. Lieutenant Cassian Dries, younger than I remembered, eyes sharp and serious. Our gazes locked for a heartbeat. He broke formation for a split second, then stopped, turned to face me, and snapped a crisp salute. The crowd fell awkwardly silent. I returned the barest nod, neither invitation nor denial, and Cassian's cheeks reddened as he fell back into line. A ripple of confusion spread through the assembly. My father shot me a questioning look. Mireille from the stage stared as if she didn't recognize me at all. All around me, people murmured, some curious, some skeptical, all suddenly aware that the story of Drusilla Mace wasn't as simple as they'd believed. By the time the ceremony resumed, the tension in the air had shifted, restless, uncertain. I sat perfectly still, every sense heightened, remembering another life where I had worn the uniform and knowing that this day would not be the last to challenge the boundaries of silence and truth. Memory is a tricky thing. At Westmore Military Academy, I had been the one others sought out for study groups and midnight strategy drills, the cadet, who could break down a complicated assault plan with a clarity that made even the upperclassmen nod in respect. Professors would call on me to demonstrate field maneuvers, and I had quietly begun to believe there was a place for me in the Mace family legend until that final winter. It was a night I never speak of. A summons to the commandant's office, urgent and discreet. There were government men in dark suits and a silence so thick it pressed on my chest. They asked questions I can't repeat. Then came the orders, pack a bag, leave with them, no word to anyone. I vanished from Westmore for days. When I returned, my uniform was gone, my name erased from the roster. All I could offer my family was a formal resignation. The questions burned behind their eyes, but I gave no answers. And so I became the story they whispered about the prodigy who cracked under pressure, the sister who left. Years later, nothing had changed. At the post-ceremony reception, the air buzzed with congratulations for Mireille, and scraps of laughter trailed in my wake. Mireille's friends huddled in a corner, their words sharper than they knew. "You know, quitting takes more guts than she ever had," one muttered loud enough for me to hear. My father gave me a curt nod, the kind reserved for guests, and moved quickly to pose beside Mireille for a photograph, his arm heavy on her shoulder. Back in my room that night, the loneliness pressed close. I noticed the folded slip of paper on the floor. Unfolding it, I read the message short, anonymous, careful. "Some heroes wear no medals. Thank you for your service. A friend." My fingers shook. I stared at the note, turning it over and over, feeling the old ache of secrets, and realized I was not as invisible as I'd thought. The banquet hall was all glass, and echoing voices, polished cutlery, and uniforms adorned with rows of ribbons. I hovered near the outermost table hands, clasped a shadow moving at the edge of someone else's celebration. Mireille, radiant in her new rank, stood beneath the spotlight and began her speech, her voice steady and strong. She spoke about honor, about the sacrifices required by military families, about the legacy carried forward by her parents and younger brother. There was no mention of me, as though I had always been an outsider looking in. The applause was thunderous, a wall of sound that pressed me further into the background. I caught my mother's brief apologetic glance before she turned back to congratulate Mireille. My father, animated, seemed not to notice my absence from the story at all. As the crowd relaxed into conversation and laughter, I felt the weight of more eyes than usual on me. Colonel Aurelio Renner, head of security, caught my gaze with a look that lingered, searching, almost knowing. Later, as the tables shifted and people milled about, Brigadier Tavian Roche approached with the deliberate nonchalance of a man accustomed to secrets. He stood beside me for a moment, his hand casually sliding a folded photograph onto my plate, before moving on without a word. I glanced down, heart pounding. The photograph was unmistakable, a much younger me, standing beside General Saul Avram, the two of us in heavy coats, at a snow-dusted base somewhere deep in Germany. There were no dates, no labels, just the image. My mind raced. How had Roche come by it, and why show it to me now? I tucked the photograph quickly into my purse, feeling a surge of uneasy recognition. Across the room, Mireille and my father exchanged a look. Their smiles, tight eyes narrowed. I could sense the change in the room, the questions rising in whispered currents between the officers. My family's carefully curated version of me had always depended on secrecy, but tonight something essential was shifting. The clatter of cutlery was fading, the banquet sliding toward that gentle chaos, where ties loosen and stories begin to drift into laughter. I was halfway to the exit, determined to slip out before anyone else could ask questions, when a hush fell over the room. I felt the shift before I saw its cause, the collective straightening of spines, the sudden hush of conversation. In the main doorway stood General Saul Avram, unmistakable, even out of uniform, his presence enough to draw every gaze and silence every tongue. He made no pretense of mingling or making rounds. Instead, he walked the length of the hall, a clear line parting through the crowd as he moved. His eyes scanned faces, pausing only when they found mine. He did not hesitate. The space between us closed in seconds, and the energy in the room went brittle with anticipation. General Avram stopped before me. His voice, when it came, was crisp and unyielding. "General," he said, addressing me with the weight of old secrets and shared burdens. Then he snapped a salute sharp and perfect for all to see. A shockwave of silence rippled outward. Every fork stilled, every conversation died mid-sentence. The word hung in the air, General, not Miss, not Drusilla, but the title reserved for a leader. I saw my father's jaw slacken, my mother's hand fly to her mouth, and Mireille's composure vanish. I felt the sting of dozens of eyes as the cameras, always ready for a moment of scandal or triumph, flashed and whirred in my direction. General Avram leaned closer, voice low and half amused. "You still keep them guessing, don't you, Drusilla?" He smiled with a rare warmth, then turned to address the gathered officers, making it clear with a single look that the narrative had changed. The hush became a rumble of speculation. For the first time in years, no one quite knew where I belonged, and I was content to let that uncertainty linger as the evening's events threatened to spill into something entirely new. The air itself seemed to contract, heavy with the stunned silence that followed General Avram's salute. I felt 100 eyes on me, the crowd's breath held in a single communal suspension. Then the murmurs began a ripple. First, then a rising wave. Across the hall, officers whispered urgently to each other, hands half covering mouths. My family, frozen in disbelief, looked as if they might shatter under the weight of revelation. Mireille sat as if pinned to her chair, her promotion a fading afterthought. My father's pride curdled into confusion. My mother's expression shifted from uncertainty to something almost pleading. For a moment, I felt sorry for all of them. The story they had written for me, failure, disgrace, the one who never lived up to the family name, was dissolving before their eyes. I stood steady as I ever was on parade and met General Avram's gaze head on. "Thank you, sir," I said. Using the cadence reserved for those who speak in coded layers, the nightingale still sings, even if few can hear it. His eyes narrowed in satisfaction. We both knew what the words meant, even if no one else did. I turned then to Mireille, her composure cracking as she tried to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the reality before her. "Sometimes what you see is not all there is," I told her quietly, voice pitched for her ears alone. The murmurs grew. News, as it always does, outpaced discretion. Old friends approached me with a new respect, some in awe, some sheepish in their attempts to apologize for past dismissals. Even rivals who once reveled in my absence now offered awkward salutes and congratulations. The transformation in their manner was almost comical, but I let it wash over me, neither embracing nor rejecting it. The Mace family sat at the center of it all, a fragile island in a shifting sea, as the reality of my life, once hidden behind locked doors and silent years, finally began to surface. That night, as the last of the banquet's laughter faded and the hall emptied, I received a discreet summons to a small windowless room deep within the officers' wing. General Avram sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other senior commanders, whose faces I knew only from sealed files. Their greetings were spare but sincere. I took the seat they offered, the door closing with the click of old habits and older trust. No one asked if I was ready. There are moments when a life spent in silence finds its reckoning, and I met it as I always had, eyes forward, voice steady, never flinching from the truth. I told them how after my supposed expulsion from Westmore, I was approached by a pair of men whose names would never appear in any record. They offered me a path into the Nightingale program, a black ops unit whose very existence was denied by everyone who'd ever worn a uniform. My orders were clear: disappear from public view, sever every visible tie, and dedicate myself to a world where failure could mean far more than disgrace. The missions became my life: Berlin, Istanbul, Cairo, Kabul. The list of cities where I lived beneath borrowed names grew longer than the birthdays and holidays I missed. There were weeks spent in safe houses, years without a word to anyone who cared. More than once, I was within minutes of home, but could not risk a single phone call. The hardest assignment came in Virginia when I intercepted a plan to kill a senior American advisor. My father Corbett never knew how close he came to becoming a name etched in marble. I watched from the shadows and then vanished again. His life saved, my presence erased. When I finished, Avram's eyes shone with tears. He did not bother to hide. He thanked me for carrying the burden in silence, for choosing the country over comfort. I nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement, but aware that some sacrifices were never meant for recognition. The meeting adjourned, and I stepped back into the night heart, heavier and lighter all at once, knowing that the past rarely stays hidden forever. It didn't take long for the truth to spread through every corridor of Fort Orion and beyond. The story of the black sheep, who was in fact a general, cloaked in silence for 2 decades, became the subject of fascination, envy, and rumor. My family was caught in the wake. Mireille, once so certain of her place in our family's constellation, now moved through the halls in a daze, her confidence unraveled by the revelation that I had never been the person they'd believed. One evening, she cornered me in the barracks garden, her eyes shining with accusation and something like fear. "You couldn't just let me have it, could you?" she said, voice trembling. "I worked my whole life for this. You didn't even want the attention, and still you took everything." I waited, letting the words find their weight. She broke the silence with a confession I sensed she'd been carrying for months. "It was me," she whispered, "the emails to those watchdog sites about you. I wanted you out of the way." The air between us grew tight, the old wounds opening in new ways. Before I could answer, a young officer sprinted up, face pale. There had been a breach classified documents, my most recent operational brief, posted on an encrypted military forum. The room spun as details came into focus. The cybersecurity team traced the intrusion to an IP linked to Mireille's network access. She'd logged in from an unsecured tablet, desperate for validation, never suspecting that her carelessness would open a door she could not close. Worse still, analysis revealed a dormant malware signature. I recognized immediately a subtle fingerprint left years ago by Soren Galt, a disgraced intelligence officer and old adversary. The code had lain in wait, triggered only by the very mistake Mireille had just made. Her hands shook as she realized the enormity of what she'd done, tears beginning to fall as I pulled her close, the bitter taste of guilt and fear sharp on my tongue. Together we faced the looming consequences, the tangled web of secrets threatening to consume us both as the crisis deepened. General Avram wasted no time. Within hours, he called a high-security meeting and formed a specialized task force. He handed me the lead, his voice grave, but confident. Mireille was named my deputy, a gesture that stung for us both, though neither dared show it in public. My father was tapped for intelligence support, my mother for logistical oversight. For the first time since childhood, the Mace family was united around a singular, urgent mission. We set up operations in a secure wing of the base. Mireille and I sat shoulder to shoulder before the screens, the tension between us thick but shot through now with a new sense of necessity. Old grievances had to wait. The breach had to be contained. We worked through the night cross-referencing logs, tracing digital fingerprints, running forensics on every device. The trail was as complex as any puzzle I'd faced in the field, but patterns began to emerge. An unfamiliar packet signature hidden in the data stream pointed unmistakably to Soren Galt. My heart clenched at the name a former colleague I'd once trusted, later disgraced and expelled for espionage. He'd always blamed me for his downfall. The malware, designed to lie dormant for years, had waited for the precise trigger, unauthorized queries, and unsecured emails, just as Mireille had unwittingly provided. Together, Mireille and I unraveled Galt's web of deception. She asked questions, her voice sometimes raw, but I could see her learning, her quick mind, her resolve, the flickers of admiration when I pieced together a line of code or predicted Galt's next move. For the first time, the wall between us began to crumble. We worked side by side, racing to contain the breach before more data could be exfiltrated, before Galt's last act of revenge could destroy everything I'd built in secret. We didn't speak of forgiveness, but in those tense hours, something changed. I watched my sister fight for our family's reputation and my own, her hands steady at the controls as we shut down Galt's access, for good, knowing the fight was not yet over. The days blurred into nights as we closed down every vulnerability and watched Galt's digital presence flicker out for good. We recovered the last of the compromised files just in time to prevent irreparable harm. As the immediate danger faded, a heavier reckoning settled on us all. Accountability was coming, and no one could avoid it, not even family. Mireille was the first to speak at the preliminary hearing. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook, and I saw the effort it took not to break down. She confessed everything, taking responsibility for the security lapse and the rumors she had spread. Her offer to resign and accept a court-martial hung in the air, brave but broken. There was pain in my father's eyes, and my mother wept quietly, but no one tried to shield Mireille from the consequences she now owned. When my turn came, I surprised them all. I stepped forward and admitted that I, too, had failed, not by action, but by absence. My secrecy had built a wall between us, leaving Mireille alone, with shadows and questions. We are strongest not when we are flawless, I said to the assembled leadership, but when we lift each other after we fall. I made it clear that Mireille's mistake, while serious, was not born of malice, but misunderstanding and loneliness, a wound I had helped create. There was a pause before the verdict. The panel of officers consulted in low voices and then delivered their judgment. Mireille would be officially reprimanded and demoted, but she would keep her commission given a second chance in a lesser command. The lesson was clear. Redemption was possible, but never easy. As for me, the risk I'd taken by sharing blame did not go unnoticed. The base buzzed with new respect, but I felt only relief that Mireille was given a path forward. My family sat together that evening, bruised but finally honest. The silence between us changed no longer a wall but a door left open for something new to begin. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and cold sunlight catching on polished insignia and formal dress uniforms. For once I stood at the center of the room instead of its edge, side by side with General Avram. The banners above us bore the weight of 100 stories, but today the one told was finally mine. As the crowd settled, I found my family in the front row, faces worn but no longer distant. Corbett's pride was tempered by humility. Celine's eyes shone with tears she no longer tried to hide. Mireille sat with her hands folded, gaze steady, her presence beside them, a kind of promise. When I spoke, I kept my words simple. I told them about the men and women I'd worked alongside, the cost of secrets, and the lessons learned in the shadows. Recognition is fleeting, but integrity endures, I said, letting the truth land in the quiet that followed. What we choose to carry defines us, and sometimes the greatest victories are the ones no one else ever sees. I glanced at Mireille, saw the regret and hope mingling in her eyes. After the ceremony, she approached me with a hesitant embrace, whispering, "Thank you for everything. I want to do better. I want us to do better." I squeezed her shoulder, the years between us softening at last. Corbett shook my hand, the gesture less formal than before, more a father's apology than an officer's duty. My mother pressed a handkerchief into my palm and held it there, fingers trembling. There was no grand reconciliation, just small acknowledgments, words and gestures mending old fractures in quiet, necessary ways. As the sun set, the medals pinned to my chest felt lighter than the knowledge that had weighed on me for so long. I walked away from the podium, not seeking applause, but carrying the certainty that silence, when chosen for the right reasons, was never weakness. My story had finally been spoken, and in the space left by secrets, something whole could finally begin to grow.